Imagine being kicked out of your own home at 18 sick and with nothing but a phone, while your parents hand your entire future to your older brother. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened here. But this isn't just a story of betrayal, it's about grit, comeback, and a moment of ultimate reckoning you won't see coming. Stick around, because this ride gets intense. By the way, where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I remember that day so clearly, even now, like it's burned into my memory. I was 18 sick with mononucleosis and sitting on that paper-covered table in the doctor's office, feeling the chill of the room seep through the thin gown. My hands were clasped so tightly my knuckles were white, not because of the doctor or the impending diagnosis, but because I knew I had to go home and tell my parents. I could feel it in my bones, the words the doctor hadn't even spoken yet. Mononucleosis. Severe case, weeks, maybe months of mandated rest. And I knew exactly how that would sound to my parents: an obstacle, a problem, a reason to look at me as less than. When I finally stepped into the quiet of our house, clutching the prescription that felt like a death sentence to my college plans. The kitchen was eerily still. Mark and Susan were there, my parents, and of course, Christopher, my older brother, sitting with that smug little grin that always made me feel invisible. "There you are," my father said flatly, without any warmth, like he was about to read a verdict instead of greeting his daughter. My voice trembled as I tried to explain. "I have to tell you something. I'm sick." The doctor said, "It doesn't matter." My mother cut me off, barely glancing up from inspecting her nails. Her tone was steel. "We've made a decision." I froze. I could barely process the words. "What decision?" I whispered, the fear crawling up my spine. "You," my father said, pointing at me, "are not college material. We've seen your grades slip. Your brother, Christopher, he has real potential. He deserves the future we've been saving for, not you." I felt my blood run cold. What my college fund, my car, my room, they were giving it all to him. I stared at my mother, desperate, pleading silently, but she shrugged like it was nothing. My own room, my possessions, my entire future, they were just being handed away as if I'd never existed. And then my father stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The cold air of late autumn hit my face like a physical force. "You're 18, he said. "You're an adult. You're on your own." I choked on the words, trying to find something to argue with. "But I'm sick. I have mono. I have nowhere to go." "Your brother deserves the future," my mother repeated, her voice like unforgiving steel. In that moment, my entire world tilted. I had a backpack with a half-empty water bottle and a phone with 48% battery. That was it. They grabbed my arm, shoved me out, and slammed the door. I collapsed onto the cold porch, shaking, trying to wrap my head around the betrayal. I had never felt so alone, so small, so powerless. The panic hit immediately. My phone, my lifeline, could only last 2 hours. I had nowhere to go. Friends couldn't help. They were kids themselves. The world had shrunk to a 2-mile radius around a diner with fluorescent lights and the possibility of staying awake long enough to think. That first night was a blur of panic and exhaustion. I walked, I rode buses, I searched for a 24-hour diner. I spent hours nursing a single cup of black coffee, trying to stay alert while the mono dragged me down. like a lead weight in my chest. Every door that opened made me flinch, half expecting my father to step in not to help me, but to make sure I knew I didn't belong anywhere. For 2 days, I slept wherever I could, in corners, in public bathrooms, anywhere I could rest without being thrown out again. Finally, I remembered Tabitha, my high school friend. She lived an hour away in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, working as a barista. I called trembling, barely believing she would say yes. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that could kill you with anticipation. "Jen," she finally said. I told her everything, my voice cracking. She hesitated, citing her lease restrictions, but finally agreed. "Okay, but it's temporary," she said. Relief hit me like a physical force. I felt dizzy, sick with gratitude. Her couch became my world. For the first 2 weeks, I was too weak to do anything but sleep. She left me half her dinners, her aspirin, her kindness, a lifeline I hadn't expected in this cruel world. Even as I regained strength physically, the emotional trauma settled like a weight I couldn't shake. Rage simmered constantly. I took a job at a 24-hour convenience store, midnight to 8 a.m., minimum wage, dealing with truckers and drunk college kids. A few months later, I got a day job at a warehouse, 9 to 5 packing boxes. Sleep was a luxury 4 hours tops on Tabitha's couch. And through it all, I taught myself to code, library computers being my classroom. Python first, then C++ and SQL. It was the only control I had in a world that had taken everything from me. The betrayal wasn't just my 18th birthday, it had been a lifetime of being eclipsed, of sacrifices ignored, of every small achievement redirected to Christopher. The regional science fair prize I'd won at 16, taken for him. The savings for a car, taken. The college fund emptied into his hands, taken. My parents had been building him up while dismantling me piece by piece. The moment on the porch wasn't the start. It was the culmination of 18 years of systematic disregard. And now, I was literally building my life from nothing, from sickness, from the cold bite of the street, from 2 jobs that barely kept me afloat. It was fear, yes, but it was also clarity. I understood the landscape now. The world was cruel, but I was learning, adapting, surviving. Every shift, every library session, every moment on Tabitha's couch became a brick in the foundation of my independence. Anger fueled my determination. Betrayal sharpened my focus. And beneath it all, a quiet, simmering realization they could take my money, my car, my room, even my scholarship. But they could never take my mind, my drive, my ability to build a future from the nothing they left me with. Every day, I was learning, surviving, becoming something they couldn't control or predict. The first days after being kicked out felt like moving through a fog that was both physical and mental. My phone battery was at 48%, my only connection to the world. And I had no idea where to go. I scrolled through contacts, trying to think of anyone who might help. But friends were just kids themselves, living under the roofs of parents who probably wouldn't let them shelter someone like me. Every number I considered dialing filled me with guilt and hesitation, like I'd be putting someone else in danger just by existing. The bus schedule became my roadmap, the city streets, my temporary home, and the fluorescent glare of every diner a strange comfort. I clutched the few dollars I had left, enough for 1 cup of black coffee, and sat in a corner booth, trying to look like I belonged, trying to keep awake even as my body screamed for rest. Mono was no joke. My fever raged, my body ached, and even the simple act of keeping my eyes open felt monumental. Each time the door to the diner opened, I flinched, imagining my parents coming in, telling me I couldn't be there either, and the dread made my stomach twist into knots. I slept wherever I could without being noticed. Corners of diners, public bathroom stalls, anywhere I could find a moment of rest without drawing attention to myself. The streets were cold, unkind, and indifferent, and each night I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me, reminding me that I was alone. Hunger was a constant companion. The coffee I could afford gave me a small jolt, but it wasn't food, it was fuel, and I needed every ounce of energy I could muster to navigate this strange, frightening existence. The city blurred past me as I moved from place to place, sometimes standing in line for hours just to sit somewhere warm, just to have a moment of respite. After 2 grueling days, I realized I had no choice but to reach out to someone who might understand, someone who could offer at least temporary shelter. My thoughts went immediately to Tabitha, my old high school friend. She had always been kind in small, quiet ways. And maybe, just maybe, she would understand the gravity of my situation. I called her, my hands trembling, voice breaking, barely able to get the words out. "Tabitha, I'm sleeping in a diner. I have nowhere else to go. Can I stay? Just for a few nights, I'll stay on the floor. I won't be a problem." I pleaded, each word heavy with desperation. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that stretches for what feels like forever. And then finally, she spoke. "Okay," she said cautiously, voice full of pity but still a lifeline. "But only temporarily. I can't have you staying longer than a few days. My lease says no overnight guests for more than 3 days." Relief washed over me so intensely, I almost felt dizzy. It was the first real comfort I'd felt in 2 days, a small island in the storm of chaos and betrayal. Tabitha's apartment became my refuge. For the first 2 weeks, I was too weak to do much besides sleep. Mono had sapped every ounce of energy from my body, and even the simplest movements felt like climbing a mountain. But she left little signs of care: half her dinner, a spare aspirin, a gentle reminder to drink water. It wasn't much, but in that state of utter vulnerability, it felt like the world was opening a small crack of warmth and humanity just for me. I learned to accept help in a way I had never allowed myself before. There was no pride in being healthy or independent when the alternative was collapsing in exhaustion on the cold, hard floor of a diner. Her kindness was practical and quiet, not grandiose, but it was enough to keep me moving, enough to remind me that I could survive. The days and nights blurred together. My body began to recover, but the emotional toll was still immense. Fear, shame, and anger coiled inside me, simmering beneath the surface. Each day was a test of endurance. Could I keep going? Could I stay in the world without collapsing under the weight of betrayal? The rhythm of survival became clear. Sleep when you could, eat when you could, keep your head down, and move through the hours one by one. Every small action, boarding a bus, finding a warm place to rest, rationing coffee and snacks, was both necessity and training. It was a harsh curriculum, but one I had no choice but to learn. Even as I slept on Tabitha's couch and nursed my recovery, I found myself thinking about what I needed to do next. Survival wasn't enough. I had to find work, find a way to make money, find a way to build even the smallest semblance of stability. The first days were about endurance, but soon, the idea of planning for tomorrow crept in, insistent and demanding. My body was weak, but my mind was slowly sharpening, fueled by the anger and injustice I felt. The world had thrown me onto the streets, yes, but it also forced me to adapt, to think critically, to strategize. Each small challenge, each night spent awake in a strange place, was teaching me resilience, determination, and resourcefulness in a way I could never have learned in the safety of my old life. Even in the smallest moments, Tabitha's generosity was transformative. A shared cup of instant noodles, a note reminding me to rest, a quiet word of encouragement as she left for her second job. All these things mattered more than I could have realized at the time. They reminded me that human connection, even the simplest form, could be a lifeline. They also gave me an example of quiet resilience, someone balancing her own challenges while offering what little she could to help another. I absorbed that, internalized it, and used it to fuel my own resolve. I realized that surviving wasn't just about food or shelter. It was about finding a way to maintain some measure of humanity in the chaos. My routine slowly began to form. I learned the bus schedules, the diner hours, and the places where I could rest safely. The city became a strange kind of classroom, teaching me how to read people, navigate public spaces, and manage exhaustion. I discovered a rhythm to the chaos, a place to sleep, a place to eat, a place to plan the next day. The unpredictability never went away, but I learned to move with it, to anticipate what might happen, and to make decisions under pressure. It was exhausting in ways that went far beyond physical fatigue. The mental strain was relentless, the emotional weight constant, but I began to understand that endurance could become strength, and hardship could become training. Through these early struggles, a fierce determination began to form inside me. I realized that my parents had tried to define my limits, to dictate what I deserved, and they had failed. I might have lost my room, my car, and my college fund, but I hadn't lost my mind, my talent, or my ability to act. Each day that I navigated the streets, each night that I found a place to rest, was a small victory, proof that I could exist independently, even under impossible conditions. Tabitha's small acts of kindness gave me the stability to start thinking beyond survival, to begin imagining a life where I could reclaim control, where I could take what was mine in every sense, except the physical possessions my parents had stolen. I slowly began to internalize a critical truth: adversity could either break you or forge you. The streets, the buses, the diners, the uncertainty, all of it was brutal. Yes, but it also demanded ingenuity, patience, and persistence. I had to find solutions, improvise, and take action in ways I never had before. Each decision, from finding a safe place to sleep, to stretching $1, to navigating the bus system with minimal knowledge, became part of a growing skill set that would later define how I handled larger, more complex challenges. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't neat, but it was real, and it was mine. By the time I had stabilized on Tabitha's couch, I was a different person from the one who had stepped out onto that porch. Physically weaker in some ways, certainly, but emotionally and mentally tougher in ways I could never have predicted. I had learned how to survive, how to manage fear, how to leverage tiny advantages, and how to find support even when the world seemed indifferent. I had begun to understand that resilience isn't just enduring, it's actively creating the conditions for future growth, even in the smallest, most constrained circumstances. And while the road ahead was long and uncertain, the foundation had been laid. I was no longer a passive victim of circumstance. I had learned to move, to act, to survive, and ultimately to prepare for the life I intended to build, one small, exhausted, determined step at a time. Once I'd recovered enough to leave the haze of sickness behind, reality hit me in full force. I needed money, any money, just to survive. And it didn't matter how grueling the work would be. My first job was at a 24-hour convenience store. The midnight to 8 a.m. shift. The hours were brutal, the customers unpredictable, a mix of truckers, college kids, and the occasional irritable night owl, but I clung to it because it was a lifeline. I memorized every product, learned the register like second nature, and somehow managed to keep my body upright even as my brain begged for sleep. Every night felt like a battle of endurance, but it was also teaching me patience, precision, and the ability to handle whatever the world threw at me. By day, I added another shift at a warehouse, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., packing boxes, loading pallets, and moving inventory. It was exhausting 4 hours of sleep between jobs, barely enough to keep me functioning, but I was determined. Each shift was a grind, but it was also a crucible, a test of how far I could push myself and still function. My body ached, my hands were raw from manual labor. But in the small victories, finishing a pallet ahead of schedule, mastering the warehouse software, earning nods of approval from supervisors, I began to feel a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to family validation or handed down rewards. This was something I earned. Even with 2 jobs, I refused to let my education stall. The library became my sanctuary, a quiet place where I could slip into the world of coding. I started with Python, spending 20-minute bursts during breaks or late nights, absorbing tutorials, practicing small scripts, and building tiny projects that seemed insignificant at first, but slowly began to coalesce into real skill. It was a slow, painstaking process. No mentor, no formal guidance, just my own curiosity and relentless determination. Some nights, my eyes burned, my head throbbed, but I forced myself to keep going. Every hour spent in that library was an investment in a future that no one had given me. A future I was starting to build from scratch. And then there was Ethan. One night at the convenience store, I was scraping slushy machine residue off the walls, hands raw and aching, when a man in a crumpled suit came in, looking exhausted. He grabbed a Red Bull and a sandwich and looked vaguely familiar. After a brief exchange, we realized we both worked at the warehouse. "Night shift," he said, and I nodded, explaining my double job routine and my coding projects at the library. His eyes lit up, and he asked questions, genuinely curious. "Python, that's impressive," he said, and for the first time in years, someone seemed to see not just what I was doing for survival, but the potential I was cultivating. He became a small, bright spot in my grueling schedule, leaving me extra sandwiches or giving me heads up about library tech fairs and coding meetups. It wasn't much, but it felt like the world acknowledging that my effort had value. With each passing month, my routine solidified: midnight shifts, warehouse work, library sessions, tiny coding projects, each piece built on the last. My body was tired, yes, but my mind was sharpening. I was learning to manage exhaustion, to focus under pressure, and to turn small pockets of time into meaningful progress. I learned the discipline of consistency, that even 20 minutes every day could compound into knowledge, into skill, into tangible growth. The world outside my apartment had taught me endurance, and the library was teaching me strategy. I was slowly constructing a foundation that no one could take from me. The small wins began to add up in ways I hadn't anticipated. I debugged code that had stumped online tutorials, figured out how to automate simple tasks, and built mock projects to challenge myself. Each success, no matter how minor, was a validation that I was capable, that the hours of exhaustion and frustration were not in vain. Ethan would sometimes pause and ask, "How did you figure that out?" And I'd explain, walking him through the logic. His nod of approval, the recognition that I had talent and drive, was fuel for a fire that had been smoldering since my parents had tried to deny me everything. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the life I wanted was within reach, not given to me, but earned through sweat, persistence, and skill. The physical toll of my schedule was immense. Sleep deprivation, sore muscles, and lingering fatigue from mono were constant companions. Yet, I learned to adapt. I scheduled library sessions meticulously around shifts, ate quick, cheap meals that fueled me without slowing me down, and used every spare moment to practice coding or review tutorials. The city became a map of opportunity in disguise. The bus rides were not just transportation, but thinking time. The brief pauses in diners or on park benches were planning sessions. Even the exhaustion was a lesson in endurance and time management. I became remarkably efficient, learning to turn scarcity of resources into an asset, using limited energy, time, and focus to extract maximum results. Emotionally, I was a tightrope walker, balancing despair and hope. Anger at my parents' betrayal simmered beneath the surface, sometimes flaring, sometimes cooling into quiet determination. The sense of injustice was sharp, but I channeled it into action rather than paralysis. Every shift I survived, every line of code I wrote, every project I completed was a small reclaiming of agency. My parents had tried to dictate my future, but I was proving to myself first and foremost that the future could be built, not given. Gradually, I began to see the outlines of a vision. Coding wasn't just a hobby, it was a doorway to opportunities I couldn't have imagined while sitting in my old room, dreaming of a life that had been handed to my brother. The skills I was cultivating: Python, C++, SQL were the tools that would allow me to compete in the world on my own terms. I began to imagine it a career, not just survival. And that thought became a driving force as powerful as any fear or desperation I had felt on the streets. Every script I wrote, every problem I solved was a small rehearsal for the life I intended to claim. Ethan remained a quiet mentor of sorts. He offered advice, tips, and encouragement without imposing or judging. His small gestures, a sandwich, a heads up, a word of recognition were the scaffolding around which I began to construct both skills and confidence. I started to see myself not just as someone scraping by, but as someone who could contribute, innovate, and eventually lead. My double shifts in library marathons were brutal, but they were also proving grounds. I learned that resilience wasn't just enduring. It was deliberately and strategically building a self that could thrive, even when the odds were stacked against it. By the time the months had passed, I was no longer just surviving. I was progressing, learning, sharpening both mind and body. The combination of relentless work, self-education, and the small victories, the nods, the recognition, the occasional affirmation from someone like Ethan created a sense of momentum that was irresistible. I wasn't just biding time, I was actively transforming my life, brick by brick, hour by hour. And I began to understand a vital truth. No one could give me this future, but no one could take it from me either. I was creating it, and the foundation I was building now would carry me through challenges far greater than the ones I had faced in the first 2 months on the streets. Months of grueling work at the convenience store and warehouse, coupled with countless hours teaching myself to code at the library, had built something inside me I hadn't fully realized, yet confidence in my own abilities and a hunger to prove them. One night, as I was scrolling through job postings during a brief break between shifts, my eyes landed on something that made me pause. Ethel Solutions, a small but growing tech consulting firm, was offering an internship. It was unpaid. And honestly, I almost closed the tab right away. I couldn't afford to work for free. Yet, there was something about the description process optimization, data management, hands-on problem solving that lit a spark inside me. I realized this was more than an internship. It was a chance to put everything I'd been learning into practice, to finally move beyond survival and into building a real career. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and decided to take the risk. I submitted my resume, but I didn't stop there. I included a 3-page analysis I had prepared of their public-facing website. It wasn't just any analysis. It detailed 3 specific code vulnerabilities I'd identified and offered practical, actionable solutions. It was bold, maybe even a little audacious, but I wanted to show that I wasn't just another applicant. I was serious. I wanted them to see my potential, to understand that I could do more than just follow instructions. I could solve real problems. The next day, I got a call, not from HR, but from David Chen, the vice president of operations himself. His tone was sharp, slightly incredulous, like he wasn't sure whether to admire or reprimand me. "Jennifer, this analysis," he said, "it's good. It's also arrogant. You shouldn't have put this in an email. This is sensitive information." I stammered, apologizing, explaining that my only intent was to demonstrate my seriousness. There was a long pause on the line, and then he asked, almost rhetorically, if I was the person from the warehouse. I confirmed, voice small but steady. He smiled well. Not a smile exactly, but a recognition, a glimmer of understanding. He had heard about me from Ethan, the warehouse colleague who had mentioned my coding skills. Apparently, Ethan had vouched for me, describing me as a secret coding genius. David paused again, then said something that made my chest tighten with disbelief. "Don't come in for the internship. It's a waste of time. Come in tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll find a paid position for you. Junior analyst. Don't be late." I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Paid real work. A chance to apply everything I had been grinding for. I couldn't believe it. In that moment, I felt the first taste of what my own effort could create. the first acknowledgement that my relentless work and late nights weren't going unnoticed. That night, sleep came with a strange lightness I hadn't felt in years. I had survived the streets, worked 2 punishing jobs, and taught myself skills in stolen hours, but now it felt like all of it was converging into something tangible, something real. Starting at Ethel Solutions was like stepping into a different world. The office smelled faintly of coffee and new technology, the hum of computers and printers creating a low, steady rhythm. David was demanding, meticulous, and exacting, but in a way that didn't crush you, it pushed you to be better. From day one, he treated my desperation as an asset, recognizing that hunger could drive excellence if guided properly. "You're hungry, Jennifer," he told me during my first year review, his eyes sharp. "Good, don't ever get full." It wasn't just a pep talk, it was a philosophy. And I took it to heart, letting it fuel my ambition. The work was challenging in ways I hadn't experienced before. I had to navigate complex data sets, analyze workflows, and identify inefficiencies that even seasoned employees overlooked. I worked long hours, often staying late to automate tasks or refine reports, and every success, no matter how small, felt like a triumph. I was finally in an environment where effort directly translated into recognition, where competence mattered more than pedigree or parental approval. Slowly, the company began to notice. Projects I had handled efficiently were highlighted in meetings. My recommendations were implemented, and colleagues started to seek my input on technical problems. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Promotion came quickly, faster than I could have imagined. Within 18 months, I moved from junior analyst to team lead. It wasn't luck. It was the culmination of years of endurance, skill building, and the ability to execute under pressure. I was managing a small team, mentoring colleagues, and overseeing projects that had a tangible impact on the company's growth. My past, the hardship, the long nights, the cold streets, wasn't something I carried with shame anymore. It was a secret weapon, a source of perspective and resilience that set me apart from peers who had never faced true adversity. Mentorship from David was invaluable. He didn't coddle me, but he offered guidance, challenge, and most importantly, recognition of my potential. He taught me how to think strategically, how to anticipate problems before they arose, and how to present solutions persuasively to clients. Under his guidance, I learned not just to do the work, but to understand the business, the people, and the systems I was impacting. The combination of his mentorship and my relentless self-education created a compounding effect. The more I learned, the more opportunities opened, and the more I could prove my capabilities. I started to see a pattern, a principle that would carry me forward. Opportunity favors preparation. The months and years of scraping by, coding in stolen library hours, working 2 punishing jobs, all of it had prepared me for this moment. When the chance at Ethel Solutions appeared, I was ready to seize it, ready to demonstrate my value, ready to convert hard work into tangible success. Each project completed, each process improved. Each report analyzed with precision was a brick in the foundation of a career that was fully my own. I was no longer defined by what my parents had taken from me. I was defined by what I had built with my own hands and mind. The turning point was subtle but profound. Recognition from colleagues, trust from leadership, and small wins in projects created a feedback loop that reinforced my confidence. I realized that I could excel without relying on someone else's approval, that I could carve out a professional identity separate from family expectations or past limitations. The work I did mattered, and the value I brought was undeniable. It was validation that talent, when combined with relentless effort and the courage to take calculated risks, could transform a life. There were challenges, of course. Not every project went smoothly. Not every suggestion was implemented, and setbacks were frequent. But for the first time in years, setbacks didn't feel like personal failure. They felt like data, like input to analyze and learn from. I approached problems strategically, applying the same analytical mindset I had developed in coding. Identify the issue, break it down, test solutions, iterate. It was a methodology that transformed frustration into opportunity, and slowly, consistently, my influence within the company grew. By the end of my first year, I wasn't just a team member, I was a force within the company. I had proven that someone who had been homeless, sick, and betrayed could not only survive but thrive in a professional environment. The unpaid internship that had seemed like a risk became the platform from which I launched a career. I had a mentor who believed in me, a skill set sharpened by years of struggle, and a work ethic forged under conditions most people could never endure. And most importantly, I had regained control over my own future, proving to myself that no obstacle, no betrayal, and no setback could define what I was capable of achieving. It started like any other day at work. My head down, reviewing resumes for the operations project I was now leading. Ethel Solutions had entrusted me with building the new junior management team, which meant sifting through dozens of applicants, evaluating skills, and determining who would make it to the next round. I had developed a rhythm, a process, evaluate experience, verify skills, flag potential red flags, and schedule interviews with those who truly fit the role. It was methodical, meticulous, and exhausting but rewarding, until I stumbled across a name that made my coffee go down the wrong way. Christopher, my last name, my brother, the golden child, the one my parents had always claimed deserved everything. The resume sat there on my screen, a digital echo of everything I had endured, a mirror of entitlement and unearned privilege staring back at me. My first reaction was disbelief. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering, hands gripping the armrests. Could it really be him? The education section, the GPA, the work history. It all lined up exactly as I remembered from family anecdotes. A 2.7 GPA, a late graduation, a couple of laughably short-term jobs, and a full 2-year gap. It was pathetic, objectively so, and completely unsuitable for the junior project manager role he had applied for. Every instinct screamed to reject the application immediately, to pretend it had never appeared. No one would ever know. I could erase it from my mind and move on, but there was something else stirring, something colder, strategic. The part of me that had spent years surviving, adapting, and sharpening skills in adversity. This wasn't just about him applying for a job. This was about accountability. This was about observing, evaluating, and letting the professional process play out. I closed the other tabs on my computer, focused solely on his file. My fingers hovered over the mouse, resisting the urge to hit reject. Instead, I started planning. This wasn't going to be petty revenge. It was going to be a controlled, professional test. I scheduled his first round interview for the following Monday at 10 a.m., assigning myself as the interviewer. The rest of the weekend blurred into preparation. I reviewed his resume repeatedly, marking glaring gaps and inconsistencies, noting every point of weakness, every area where entitlement had replaced effort. I compared it against other qualified candidates, analyzing where he fell short, and crafted a line of questioning designed to test not only skills, but professionalism, self-awareness, and honesty. I memorized project specifications, KPIs, and benchmarks that he would have to know if he were competent. It was intense, meticulous work, but I felt a strange satisfaction in approaching it like a challenge rather than a confrontation. Monday arrived, and with it, a palpable tension that I had to mask under the calm demeanor I had cultivated in this role. The office smelled of coffee and faint printer ink, a familiar environment that suddenly felt charged with anticipation. At 9:50, my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Jennifer, your 10 o'clock is here." I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, and replied evenly, "Send him in." The door opened, and there he was. Christopher, taller than I remembered, his boyish charm replaced with a soft, unearned confidence that had always been his armor. He strode in, ill-fitting suit, fake smile plastered on, hand extended, as if I were some low-level assistant rather than the person managing this interview. The first thing I noticed was the shock on his face. His eyes widened as they landed on the nameplate on my desk. The tailored blazer, the professional environment that he had never earned a place in. "Jen," he whispered, a mixture of disbelief and unease creeping into his voice. The extended hand froze mid-air before dropping awkwardly to his side. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Please sit down, Mr. Last name," I said, voice calm, professional, controlled. No trace of the years of hurt or anger surfaced. I was conducting an interview, nothing more, nothing less. My personal history with him was irrelevant here. His qualifications or lack thereof were the only thing that mattered. He sat down, visibly trying to recover his composure, muttering, "Jenny, what are you doing here? You're the interviewer." I nodded, maintaining the same calm tone. "Yes, I'm the senior team lead for this project. This is your interview for the junior project manager position. Shall we begin?" The words were straightforward, neutral, yet the weight of them carried an undeniable authority. The first shock had worn off. Now, the tension in the room was thick, the air charged with anticipation. Christopher attempted to regain some control, his entitled demeanor momentarily resurfacing. "Mom and Dad said you were working in a store. They said you were struggling." I didn't flinch. I ignored the attempt to bait me into a personal confrontation. "We are not here to discuss my history," I said firmly. "We are here to discuss your qualifications. Let's start with your resume." Holding up his resume, I began with the basics. "It says here you graduated with a 2.7 GPA in business management. Can you explain why you believe that GPA reflects an aptitude for a high-pressure, detail-oriented role?" He gaped, the brain that had been confident in its inherited privilege struggling to process the situation. He stammered through a weak justification, claiming the school was hard, but the logic didn't hold under scrutiny. I made a note, neutral, precise. Next came the employment gaps. There's a 2-year gap since graduation. Can you walk me through what you were doing during that time? He fumbled, inventing stories of networking and exploring options. I repeated, carefully. A sabbatical for 2 years must have been very refreshing. The room was quiet except for the faint scratching of my pen. I moved on to his brief work history. Assistant manager at a sporting goods store for 6 months. Summer intern at an uncle's insurance office. What were your key performance indicators in those roles? Metrics for success, inventory management, sales targets. His response was pitifully vague. I worked the register, made the schedule. There was no documented management experience, no project management, no technical skill, nothing that even remotely justified the role he had applied for. The color returned to his face, patchy with embarrassment and anger. His entitlement tried to reassert itself. You can't do this. Jenny, this is my interview. You're just the help. I'm going to report you. You're sabotaging me. I arched an eyebrow, calm and professional. Sabotaging Mr. Last name. I am conducting this interview by the exact standards set by our client. You are a candidate, and at present, you are failing to demonstrate your suitability for this position. His fury flared, replacing shock with familiar arrogance. This is petty. You're just jealous. I let my professional mask slip for a fraction of a second, and he flinched. Jealous of what, Christopher? Your 2.7 GPA, your 2-year sabbatical, the fact that you were handed my college fund and squandered it, and are now sitting in my office begging for a job you haven't earned. He was speechless. The truth, delivered calmly, professionally, had struck him like a blow. I observed him silently, noting every facial expression, every moment of discomfort, every crack in the wall of entitlement he had built around himself. Finally, I stood. This interview is over. Thank you for your time. Our HR department will be in touch. His chair screeched as he rose, voice low and growling, threatening my position, my career, my very existence. I simply responded, even, "Are you? Go ahead, please tell them what you found. Tell them exactly where I am." The room seemed to exhale as he left, a storm of disbelief and humiliation. I sat down, my hands steady, a sip of now cold coffee in my hand. Then, with a single click, I marked his status as rejected, not qualified. It wasn't about revenge, it was about process, professionalism, and accountability. This was the culmination of years of effort, skill, and persistence. The satisfaction was quiet, internal, and immeasurable. I had controlled the situation with precision, adhering to the standards of my role while upholding fairness and integrity. The power dynamic, long skewed in his favor in the eyes of my family, had been restored in the space where merit truly mattered. I had finally created a scenario in which competence, not entitlement, determined the outcome, and the sense of closure was profound. It was validation not just of my professional capability, but of the long, difficult journey that had brought me here. The stakes had been personal, the outcome objective, and the lesson unmistakable preparation, skill, and calm execution always outweigh privilege and arrogance. The tech gala was buzzing with energy, a glittering crowd of executives, clients, and rising stars in the industry. And I was right in the middle of it, feeling a mixture of nerves and pride. I had been invited, not just as an attendee, but as a featured speaker to discuss my work in process optimization, a recognition of the career I had painstakingly built from nothing. Tabitha had helped me get ready, fussing over my hair and dress, zipping up the sleek dark blue professional gown with a grin. "You look," she said, her voice full of admiration, "like you own the place." I smiled, adjusting my posture, letting the weight of that affirmation sink in. I was working on it, I told her, but in truth, I felt ready, confident, empowered. The room was magnificent grand chandeliers, polished floors, a hum of conversations about technology and innovation. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, offering smiles, feeling the glow of recognition. And then, like a cold gust cutting through the warmth, I felt the prickle at the back of my neck that something was off. I turned slowly. At the entrance, standing awkwardly among the guests, were my parents and Christopher. They weren't in formal wear. My father's slacks were too casual, my mother's dress cheap and ill-fitted, and Christopher looked exactly the way he always had, confident, entitled, completely unaware of the weight of his own inadequacy. My first instinct was to run to David, to seek the protection and guidance I knew he could offer. But something inside me stopped. No, not here. Not in my world. This was my stage, my achievement, my life. I straightened my shoulders and stepped forward, moving toward them with calm authority. The energy in the room shifted, subtly as I approached. Conversations hushed. Glances flicked toward the sudden tension at the edge of the gala. I didn't speak yet. I just waited, letting them make the first move. "Here you are," my mother hissed, advancing, her voice a low shriek that carried across the polished hall. "You thought you could just hide from us," my father growled, and Christopher trailed behind them, attempting to hide but clearly trying to maintain some semblance of bravado. I held my ground, shoulders back, gaze steady. The room seemed to contract around us, the noise dimming until all that remained was this confrontation, public and unavoidable. "This is a private event," I said, voice low and steady, commanding without raising it unnecessarily. "You need to leave." I was fully aware that all eyes were on us, but I didn't falter, I didn't flinch. My presence, my poise, radiated the years of experience and struggle that had led me to this moment. I was no longer the vulnerable teenager thrown out of a house for being sick. I was a professional, respected, accomplished, and untouchable in this environment. "Not leaving until you fix this," my mother shrieked, desperation creeping into her voice. "You embarrassed your brother. You embarrassed me. You are going to go to your boss and give Christopher a job." I inhaled slowly, measured and controlled. "No," I said simply. "What you are asking is impossible. Christopher is not qualified. He didn't earn it. You can't have it. That ends here." Christopher, caught between the anger of my parents and the authority I now wielded, shrank behind their shoulders. His confidence faltered as he realized this wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. He had always relied on the cushion of family privilege, the assumption that I would step aside, that my parents' decisions were final. Now, he was face to face with reality. Merit, competence, and preparation determined outcomes in this space, not entitlement. It was then that David appeared, like a shadow at my side, calm and imposing. 2 hotel security guards followed him closely. Mark, Susan, and Christopher. "I presume," he said, his voice polite but edged with steel. "I believe I made myself clear. You are trespassing. The presence of authority, unyielding and absolute, reinforced everything I was asserting." My parents' mouths opened and closed, their fury palpable but impotent. They had expected to intimidate me, to leverage family ties, but here in my element, surrounded by professional peers and the firm's leadership, their tactics were meaningless. I began to speak, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Everything, let's be clear about what you gave me. On my 18th birthday, you threw me out of the house while I was sick. You told me, and I quote, 'Your brother deserves the future, not you.' You gave him my college fund. You gave him my car. You gave him my room. You left me on the street with a 48% phone battery and a case of mono." The room held its collective breath. Heads turned, whispers rippled. I continued, calm, deliberate, letting the weight of my words land, each phrase measured to convey truth without embellishment. I spent the next year working 2 jobs. I slept on a couch. I taught myself to code at a public library. I fought for everything I have. I gestured to the environment around me, the attendees, the clients. "This," I said, voice rising slightly with pride and authority, "this is my future. The one I built myself from the nothing you left me with." Christopher couldn't look at me. His gaze fell to the floor, shame and disbelief battling against the entitled posture he had clung to for so long. My parents' expressions twisted with rage, shock, and eventually a dawning realization that the power they thought they wielded had evaporated. "And you," I said, turning to Christopher, voice steady, "you took it all. You took my money, my car, and my home, and you wasted it. You failed, and now you come here to my place of work and demand that I give you the one thing you can't have. The one thing you've never understood, a future you actually earned." He didn't respond. He stood there, frozen, absorbing the truth that his life had been built on assumptions of entitlement rather than effort. My parents were trembling, unable to articulate a defense, their anger reduced to silent, impotent rage. My mother tried one last assault. "You're a liar. We did what was best." I shook my head slowly, final, resolute. "Then this is what's best," I said, glancing at the guards. "Please escort them out." Each of my parents was led away, struggling only briefly, their protests swallowed by the authority of the security team. Christopher remained, a shadow of the confident golden child I had known, now confronted with the reality of his failures. He looked at me, eyes wide, not with anger, but with dawning comprehension. "Jen," he whispered, voice small, almost pathetic. I'm sorry." The apology was belated, insufficient, but it was real. I held his gaze, expression unyielding, then turned and walked back to my clients, reasserting my place, my authority, my life. The aftermath was complete. The crowd had witnessed the reckoning, and the narrative was clear. Merit and hard work prevailed over entitlement and deception. In the following days, the professional fallout was swift and decisive. David had framed the incident to clients as a testament to the standards of excellence and accountability at the firm. I became a minor legend, the team lead who had overcome personal betrayal, asserted professional authority, and ensured that competence remained the standard. My career wasn't just secure, it was recognized and celebrated. The personal resolution was still unfolding. Christopher had been forced to confront the consequences of his choices. My parents left to grapple with the reality that their attempts to control my life had backfired spectacularly. And I, standing tall in my professional arena, felt the deep, satisfying truth of vindication. Years of struggle, sacrifice, and relentless perseverance had led to this moment, and the sense of empowerment was complete, cinematic, and undeniable. After the gala, life settled into a new normal, one where I could finally breathe and focus on the work I loved. My career at Ethel Solutions continued to flourish. I was leading major projects, mentoring new hires, and managing complex operations. With confidence I'd earned the hard way. Every promotion, every acknowledgement from clients, every successful project was a reminder that my future was mine, built from perseverance, skill, and relentless effort. It felt incredible to know I had created something lasting from nothing. Christopher, meanwhile, had been forced to confront the reality of his own choices. The illusion of entitlement had collapsed, leaving him to navigate a world he wasn't prepared for. Slowly, I saw him struggling to hold even an entry-level position, realizing that nothing was handed to him anymore. The life he assumed would be easy was now full of consequences for decisions he hadn't taken seriously. My parents' lives unraveled in parallel, their control, their pride, their golden child narrative all fractured, leaving them to face the emptiness of what they had attempted to manipulate. It wasn't revenge, it was a natural outcome of the paths they had chosen. One quiet afternoon, Christopher approached me. His voice was hesitant, raw, and stripped of arrogance. "Jen, I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, it felt real. I didn't dwell on anger. I simply offered him the advice I wish someone had given me years ago. Stop blaming everyone else. Find a job, work hard, and take responsibility for your life. Build something you can call your own. That's how you earn a future. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words. There was no entitlement left, just the hard reality of learning from mistakes. I could have been cruel, but the satisfaction wasn't in punishment. It was in witnessing understanding and growth. As I drove away that day, I reflected on the journey. From eviction and illness to late-night coding and professional triumph, every struggle had shaped me. I had learned to survive, to adapt, and ultimately, to thrive. My parents' attempts to define my future had failed. My brother had faced the consequences of his own choices, and I, finally, had earned a life entirely my own, resilient, independent, and real. From being kicked out sick and alone to building a career from scratch, this story shows the power of resilience, determination, and self-belief. Every challenge became a lesson, every setback an opportunity to grow, and every effort brought the narrator closer to a future they earned themselves. If this journey inspired you, there are countless more stories of triumph over adversity waiting to be discovered. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and share where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too.